Welcome back to Satori Sounds, the podcast that invites you to unwind, relax, and listen to the deeper currents of life. And if this is your first time, welcome. Life is full of transitions, and turning 30 often feels like a major one. In this episode, we reflect on what this milestone really means and how it shapes our perspective. We dive into the exploration phase of life, a time for growth, learning, and discovering who you really are. We'll explore the cost of knowledge and experience, how these lessons reshape our definition of success, and why time and health become some of life's most valuable assets. Finally, we'll touch on finding joy in the everyday and reflect on the powerful fable of the old man and death. Whether you're approaching 30, well past it, or simply reflecting on your own journey, this episode is packed with insights to help you embrace growth and find meaning in the moments that matter most. Let's dive in.
It's a weird decade to be walking into in this, because there's so much like turmoil's not the right word, but people are labeling
uncertainty.
Yeah.
Speaking of decades, let's talk about turning 30.
I still got a few months, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Never even heard the number 30. Just gonna go straight to 40.
Oh dear. Midlife crisis has already happened.
Absolutely. Already bought 2 sports cars.
30s are weird though. I feel like there's this hypothetical deadline that happens at 30 where people are almost like, oh, you should have your, everything should be your shit together. And actually, I would almost argue, especially, me personally, from my personal situation where I'm at now, I've actually spent the last decade exploring, and I'm just kind of starting again in a way. And it just happens to be matching up that I'm turning 30. But I think there is this hypothetical deadline where you do a bit of reevaluating, where you're going, oh, I'm 30 now. But actually, you don't wake up and you're suddenly, I don't know, a lot more responsible or a
fully
lot more
formed, perfect being. Yeah. Yeah, you're so right on that. And I think it's funny because do you remember Erickson's stages of development that I mentioned in our very first episode?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in his sort of 30 to 64, which is a huge bracket of age, if you think about it, 30 to 64,
Yeah.
That's crazy. But in that, he labels that middle age.
Middle age.
Let that sink
to
in.
64.
30 to 64, he considers that middle age. Isn't that crazy?
That's horrifying.
That's horrifying. And it's interesting because at no point have we shifted the 30 milestone to take into account that we're living much longer.
Yeah, much longer. I mean, Christ, I literally, as you said, that's what I was thinking of, 30 to 60, like that. Yeah. But then we say that, as much as we are all living a lot older, there's so much more that's happened to people our parents' age at that life age. I've seen a lot of people just flat out working through to that retirement age, which I'm not even going to give it a certain age now because it seems to be shifting all over the place. But double 30 roughly.
Are we going to retire? Is that a thing in the UK? I don't think it is.
Yeah, that's a different conversation.
Economic state aside, but it is interesting because even then, the culture around what you do for work in the next 30 years has changed. Do you remember that book you lent me, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant? He mentioned that actually what you do in your life has changed. At one point, you would get a job, you'd have that career for the entirety of your life, and that's what you'd do, and you wouldn't change. But as a culture, we have, I suppose, come away from that model and gone, well, you need to pick up lots of different skills in order to function in our society. And I think 30 is a reflection of that, because think about how many people change careers at 30. They do different things at 30 in our world. And it's just fascinating to hear that juxtaposition of thinking about our parents, thinking about what Naval Ravikant said, and actually experiencing that ourselves, that we're constantly going through this change, and 30 isn't really what it once was.
Massively not. And you think just in the last 100 years, 2 generations ago, the war families, and through to our parents for the prosperity. And then, now, I think the thing that's changed, and especially why things are getting, people getting married later, having kids later, is that we've got an abundance of choice. you think post-war, there wasn't really a choice. It was, we need to get going again. People were getting married and starting families. That was that big baby boom and etc. that came after that war. Whereas now, we've got so much choice, we can all be in different countries tomorrow. We can, Christ, if you want to take all the dating apps, you can be dating someone else by tomorrow, the way it works nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got such an abundance of...
I could hop online right now and become an ordained priest. That's how changeable our culture and society is. And I think instead of viewing 30 as this milestone of existential dread, we should, in some regards, review it as this opportunity to change different aspects of our lives. Instead of seeing it as a shackle.
I agree. And that opportunity, it's funny how we use 30 as that hypothetical deadline again, isn't it? Right? Because actually, you can wake up tomorrow and change your entire life. Really, that is within our gift. But you go, oh no, I just gotta go through and all these things. It's interesting because I was watching a video by Ray Dalio the other day of talking about like what to do in the different decades of your life in that sense. And it wasn't prescriptive in the sense, but it was more giving some guiding principles. And I really like, he was saying that actually in your 20s, that is very much that exploration phase. Time's on your side, health is on your side. You can actually just go out and explore, try different job roles. You don't have to set it all up. And I think that's been the amazing kind of opportunity that we've had coming through our 20s, is that we have been able to pivot. We've been able to try different things with relatively little consequence. A lot of choice has kind of amounted to this, in a way, no need to make a firm decision, which probably has has a bit of a juxtaposition there with having too much choice.
Has its pros and cons,
doesn't it? It's got its pros and cons of where it comes through, and then he was talking about 30. Well, actually, even then you can start to. You don't have to have it all sorted out. I think this idea of you turn 30 and have it all figured out. I mean, do we ever really have it all figured out? I think that's the beauty in a way.
There's that saying, and I really like this expression, and I think it resonates with the idea of, do you ever have it figured out? No person steps in the same river twice. So with each step, it's a different river, and they're a different person. And it's thinking about that in context of your life. Well, every day you're going to be a bit different. You're going to do things a bit differently. As we've pointed out before, your values are going to change. And with that, so do you. Just a little bit, not extensively, but over 10 years, you're going to look different to how you were, and it's thinking about that.
Oh, massively. I don't know if this is the same for you, but if I look at where I was 10 years ago, I wouldn't expect to be sitting where I am today.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Particularly doing a podcast. It's so interesting to think about the perspective. And I was watching a interview with Zizek, and he was talking about coming to understand different periods of history when you're in the next period. And granted, he was talking about this in context of political ideology, but I think it fits to aging and changing and being a different person. And he basically said, the only reason we can understand this model of society is because we're living in the next model of society. So we can look back and go, oh, I've got it. I understand that. And being an older person works the same. So I can look back at when I was 15 and go, that makes sense. That's why life was like that. I have perspective. And you might remember being 15 when you're sitting there like, oh, why is everything so hard? Why is it so difficult? And you frame it differently when you get to our age. And you go, well, I was like that because X, Y, and Z. There were these contexts behind it.
Yeah. I was trying to think. 15. No, I was playing Call of Duty and had music blaring on in the background. My life was great. I had no responsibilities.
Yeah, to be fair, 15 is a good age. Well, I don't know, because sometimes at 15 you think, oh, the world's on my shoulder, and you're like, no, dude, relax.
100%.
You just have to go to maths class. Calm down.
Yeah, but then you've got to go to university. And as soon as you're at college, you're literally fed through that system. I mean, I remember at that age, I was studying computing, electronics, business, and maths. And then I was actually now going to join the Royal Air Force. Like, I was pivoting all over the place. And
Changeable.
Well, but you have no idea at that age, I think. I mean, some people do, right? Some people are very much like, I'm going to be a pilot. And that's good for them. But I do remember feeling some anxiousness, actually, now that you're talking about that point of perspective. Because you do feel this weight in a way of, I've got to have it figured out.
Mm.
And actually, looking back now, a decade later, you don't have to have it all figured out. And even now,
Exactly.
like I'm about to completely leave the corporate world behind and start on a new journey that's completely undefined. I think actually learning what I've learned over the last decade has set me up for that.
Yeah.
I couldn't have read that in a book or taught myself it. Your river analogy, it chops and changes and etc. I couldn't have followed that exact path because it was undefined.
It becomes this statement that I really like. It becomes the price of knowledge. To know what you know now, you have to pay the price of experience. And if you want to know what I know, again, you have to be able to, or be willing to pay for that in an experiential sense. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to take that risk? I suppose it's thinking about how vital those experiences are. Coming back to that statement of societal pressures, that you have to have it figured out. You need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. And actually, it instills this idea of you should, you must, you have to. And I think one big turning point for me, growing up, leaving university, graduating, things like that, this question of why do I have to? Am I doing that because I want to, or is that because other people want me to? Who is that really benefiting me? Does that generate that sense of eudaimonia for me, that happiness, that well-being?
That's so true, though, right? Because I think at that younger age, you don't necessarily have that perspective of, is this right for me? You're still almost absorbing, you're learning and you're being guided, and you haven't necessarily, as much as you can think for yourself, you haven't really got enough experience at that stage to make those informed decisions fully. And actually, I think that can prevent a lot of people from just taking that leap. And I think you have to learn to take calculated risks in that sense of whatever you're comfortable with. And that level of calculated risk and decision making, only an individual, right, can make that choice. And as you build that, as you say, you're paying that price, but that in turn rewards you with those experiences. And, if I look back over it, there's no decision I've made that I've regretted. I've either learned from it or it's moved me in the right direction. I'm sure you could probably say the same.
Well, it's interesting when we think about regret. It's that idea of, are there things that I wish didn't happen? Of course, absolutely. But I think those things that happened pushed me into a direction that made me the person I am today. And there's this term that I've been obsessed with for a little while now, and it's not an academic term. I heard this straight from Guillermo del Toro, and he uses this term called sublime confusion. And he says our 20s is that period of sublime confusion. And it's this idea that we should have everything figured out. We should be doing this, we should be doing that. I've not made enough of myself. I'm reading the Forbes under 30 list, and look, I'm a loser. And actually, that's not what your 20s is. And that's how kind of confusing a time it is, because you're building up these ideas in your head based on what everyone else is saying and based on this internal diatribe that you've got. And it's not quite like that either. And I suppose it's taking that time to reflect on that.
Yeah, you do need to reflect it. And I think that thought also applies to your 30s, though, right? Because you could go, well, I can't change tack now, because if I don't stay on this exact same path I'm on, I'll be a fool, or I'll be even further behind. Yeah. And we've talked about this before, of climbing up a mountain and realizing you're meant to be on another one. Actually, there isn't really an undefined time to change. I don't know why this is the one that immediately jumps to my head when I think of ways to kind of picture this, but KFC failed for years, and I think he was like 65 when it finally succeeded.
Yeah. Are you hungry?
I'm starving.
That's a callback to an earlier episode, so if you're hearing this joke, go and listen to the episode.
But you know what I mean? There is this, there's no defined period where, like, Forbes 30 on 30 is great, right? And there were people out there that will smash that. And you know what? If they found that and they've done that, right? That's not necessarily your own path. And I guess as well, for me, that definition of a success is subjective, actually, because I've known and seen some very successful people, like close family friends, who you define it by success of their job title and salary. But actually, when you take a step back from that and you look at them from a personal perspective, you could argue they've not lived a successful life because they haven't always been around for their kids. Relationships have failed and they've got this burdensome of debt or other things. So I think I would definitely be taking from my last decade of my redefinition of what success looks like, because I entered my 20s gunning for financial wealth. That was like, I'm going to work all hours, make all the money I can. And, I've made some really good money and it's given some amazing experiences. But the time cost and the friendship cost that's come from that wasn't a dividend I particularly wanted to sustain paying. And that's why I'm making these changes that I'm making now.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing it. And I think to, I suppose, offer that in an alternative way, you've identified that financial wealth is one form of wealth. Actually, there are many pockets of wealth in life.
It's unique to you, isn't it? Really, that's just the obvious one, isn't it? Well, it's obvious to me from the society that I feel that we live in here. It is success is deemed on how far you've climbed up an imaginary ladder and the assets or liabilities, if you really want to look at them, that people are carrying around. You know, the 80s salesman with the flashy sports car and the big penthouse, but that used to be what success was defined by, and my definition of success personally, I just talked about that early 20s. If I look at how I'm carrying it into my 30s, it's actually around spending more time with people and the quality of time that I spend with people and my health. I know people joke that when you get to your 30s, you start to feel it a bit more, but I definitely am realizing that, that actually you can take your health for granted and really from a younger age, and you do only have one body and you've got to start looking after it.
And I think that is something that is deeply underappreciated in our society. You can make more money. It sounds so cliche, and obviously, don't get me wrong, money is hard to come by. It's hard earned. You don't just get it for nothing. And if you do, please tell me your secret. But for the most part, you only have one body. There's no replacing that.
No. You can't buy it, can you? Right? I mean, there's probably argument nowadays. People are like, oh, you can't buy certain things, but
the commodification of the flesh. All right, calm down.
But you can't, right? You can't buy health. It's not a commodity in that sense that you can just purchase. And I do remember having that conversation. This is a shout out to my grandmother here, because when I really started working and burning out, and she said to me, I'm going to remind you something that your grandfather always, or got told by one of his mentors. And I said, go on. And she said, regardless of how hard you work, money cannot buy health.
Yeah.
And I heard that years ago and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm young. I'm early 20s, I'm
so healthy.
That's literally like, I got 50 years to worry about that. But it's so true, right? It's so true that you've got to find that better balance of looking after yourself.
It's interesting to hear, and I think, it comes with a cost. All of these things come with a cost, and coming back to that earlier part of your sentence about identifying what you personally see as success, for me, I think it's time. I've come to realize that my own time is invaluable. And that's come with age. Coming to that, turning nearly 30, I'm thinking, what have I done with my time? What would I like to do with my time? Not, oh man, I've completely wasted my time. But come to that idea of, how have I spent the last 30 years? What have I been doing? What are things I'm yet to do? And asking those future questions. Where do I want to be? Am I the person that I feel like I should be? And these are big, again, existentially terrifying questions. They can be scary.
Yeah. Oh, that can be. For a lot of people, that asking that level of question can be, huge. That what you were just saying there, though, that really reminds me of a book that I recently read called Die with Zero. And it talks about that principle of time in a sense. And it kind of says that a bit like the different phases of life that you've talked about, kind of categorizes in the sense that in your earlier stages of life, you haven't got really any money, but you've got time and you've got health. You come to the middle stages of your life and you've got relatively good health, relatively good money, but not a lot of time because you've got kids, jobs, responsibilities. And then the later stage of your life, you've got good amount of time, good amount of money, but not great health. And so actually your bit around time, I think, is a real good takeaway for the listeners, because there are certain things that you can do in each phase of life. and you can't do it later on, right? You know, you can't go running off doing a backpacking trip necessarily in your 80s around Vietnam. That's just not going to be something you can do. And that reinvestment in yourself to buy that time back and have those relevant experiences, I definitely agree with you in that sense, is something that I've really taken from this last decade, because I thought that getting in the money was going to answer that question. But then I had such an imbalance that actually it's kind of like, like something's not working here. And I remember leaving sales and going back to university, and my income literally went to 10% of what it was. And ironically, my stress level was almost 10% of what it was.
I mean, as soon as people pay you a great sum, there comes an element of responsibility, and that's hard to sometimes shoulder. And I want to bring in something a friend once told me. And if you're listening, Juan, this story resonated quite a lot. But he once said to me, in the future, when you're 80, you will literally give anything to be the age you are now, to have the opportunities that you have now. And that really stuck with me. And I thought, wow. You know, there's a period of time that I'm watching myself through in my memories that I'd love to go back to. And it's thinking about those kind of principles. What can I do in the now to change my life, or to make my life how I want it to be? And that, going back to university, is a good example of that. That's why I told that story.
That's very vivid, though, that looking back in the now bit for me, I think that can really resonate, because we're always chasing the next thing. You know, I could argue I've chased away this decade. It was, I literally had chased away this decade because I had all these goals and I was going for it. And so actually learning to live more in that present, right? Because I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's something along the lines of that tomorrow, that's it. The past is history and tomorrow is a mystery, right? And so actually, as much as all these big questions are out there, and these, they can be quite, emotionally upsetting for people if you've got to think about all these, actually that is almost an argument for itself to just bring it back to the present a little more and live how you want to live in that moment, because we've talked about it before. Your values will change as they go through. So you don't want to spend 40 years of your life working for something you realize in 40 years' time you don't necessarily want, right? Live true to yourself in that moment. And that, I think, that doesn't mean, as we talked about before, over consuming and doing something literally just in the moment, but being a bit more
unless
true
it's
to
our
yourself.
Content, listeners.
Here we go. That's also a good plug.
It's the same joke, but I do agree with your point. That's another callback. It's funny how long we've been running this. We get more and more Easter eggs in our shows. That's brilliant.
It's poignant, this, actually, because we are at episode 10.
This is episode 11.
Exactly, right? So we've done 10. We've talked about the last 10 years of a decade. This is actually, by pure coincidence, a nicely shaped episode.
As Freud once said, there's no such thing as coincidences.
Ooh. Different episode.
Completely. Let's not get into that.
Write that down.
It's too scary. I don't want to write that down.
Oh, yeah.
But all this talk of aging and living the life you want to live reminds me of one of Aesop's famous fables, and it's called The Old Man and Death. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It's really interesting. Now, forgive me if I butcher it, because I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but from what I remember, there's a really old man, and he effectively supplies his village with firewood. He gets all of it, and he's been doing it for years. And so he goes out into the forest by himself and he chops up wood, and he bundles it all up, and he notices every year that he does this, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And as he's walking home with more wood, he realized that he was too tired to keep going on. And so he puts the firewood down onto the ground, and in his desperation, he shouts out for death. I can't bear my burden anymore. Please come and get me. And much to this old man's surprise, death shows up. He's there. And he's like, oh my God, this is terrifying. I can't believe death actually turned up. And as soon as he sees him, he realizes that he wants to keep living. That there's a part of him that enjoys providing firewood for his village, living the life that he's living. And that he doesn't want to miss out on this opportunity to do this. And So death says to him, I've come. What is it that you want? Did you want to die? And the old man very quickly says, no, death. Actually, all I wanted you to do was help me carry up this firewood so I can hurry home and bring the firewood back to my village. And so death was so impressed by this, he picked up the wood and sent him on his way. He helped him carry it back. And I suppose the moral of the story is careful what you wish for, but also think about the life that you're living now. Think about the joy that it brings you. And if it doesn't bring you joy, what is it that you want to change? And that's what the old man does. He goes, I want help.
Yeah, that's very vivid, isn't it? Very vivid. And wow. Yeah. That bit about joy as well that you were saying of bringing you joy, you know, you have to search for that, I think, in a way. There's things that we know, right? So in that moment, he was like, this isn't bringing me joy. I want to end it. And then actually there's that realization that actually that fulfillment that he had did bring him joy as much as in the moment he really didn't. So I think that's something that people can take away as well, is that this is, I subscribe to this in the sense, but I'm probably going to explain it in a way that people might take quite upsettingly, is that you're going to suffer anyway. So you just need to choose what to suffer for. And I don't mean severe suffering, right? But my point is that it's not all going to be smooth sailing. Life isn't that, right? And so actually that bit of joy and what you're talking about there is that you have to find something that you're willing to put the effort into, where you are going to struggle and suffer a little bit. But that in itself also gets a fulfillment. The gym, I think, is the most poignant example of that, and fitness and exercise, right? Most of the time it's painful when you start, you're getting through it, right? But the long-term benefit that you reap from that suffering as such, and going through and putting in the reps and building it, the joy that you get from that far outweighs what you feel in that moment.
Generally, pain is something you can't not experience in life. And that's that cost of knowledge. It comes with it. It's part of the journey. And you have to begin to ask yourself, is this a difficult 5 minutes? Or is it a difficult life?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to break down time like that, when you start to weigh it up, actually, am I just having a bad time right now?
Yeah.
And you're separating these 2 points.
Massively. Because you don't want to be reevaluating everything the whole time, do you? Right? We will all go through bad periods, and your bit about bringing joy. I think that's probably to pick up for the listeners, is that you can't live every second in the moment of joy, right? Because actually, then on a way, arguably, nothing's going to find you joy because you're just constantly living in that state, isn't it? Right? There are going to be things that aren't going to, and so you've got to identify: am I just going through a period of something that is discomfort, but overall there's that satisfaction? Or is it that bigger question of, actually, I don't want to be doing this?
No moment is forever. That's the thing you have to hold in mind. No matter how difficult something is, no moment is forever. No emotion, however strong, is permanent. No train of thought stays forever either. And it's finding ways to outlast that. And I think the other poignant thing about the old man story is the idea that he enjoys bringing the wood to his village. Sharing the wood so people can keep warm. And it makes me think of a saying that I heard, that no candle loses light from lighting another candle.
Yeah, another vivid metaphor of that. Yeah.
I'm full of it, mate.
It's like a diction.
Yeah, exactly. Just roll off the tongue.
It's just drooling in it. They just come flying out. But that is so true. It is so true. But there's so many examples of that level of story, right, of that providing. And I think that bit as well, providing for others, we're also, it's good to focus inwards, but there's also that fulfillment of focusing outwards. I think I can think of this last decade being very selfishly focusing on my own career, and actually I've got to the end of it for this decade and realized that the bit I enjoy the most is giving back. Which is ironic, because I definitely came into my 20s being like me. And that fell flat on its face very quickly. I went for a very long time of discomfort. And now I've been out that other side and still learning. You always got to learn right from it. But that point of realizing what's worth suffering for, and actually, being of service in a sense to other people in that way with the skills that you can provide, I think that is a good way to spend your time as well, because you get fulfillment from it, and you can help other people.
And that is remembering that value is going to be unique to the individual,
Yes.
and we're using that from our perspective. This is what brings us joy. This is what we value. But I will just add to that. Picasso once said, "Your mission in life is to find the thing that you're passionate about, refine it, and then share it with the world." So, you don't necessarily have to go out and try and help people, but it's finding what you're good at. And maybe that's the question for your 30s, the big 3-0. What are you good at? What do you like doing? And can you share it with people?
That's it. There is the ikigai. You heard that as well, the Japanese concept. That relates to that in a sense as well. We're not going to unpack that here because that's a whole different discussion itself.
We already shared it on our Instagram. There's a little page that shares these little Japanese words, these concepts. We've already given that a share.